Hello, everyone. Welcome to the exciting webinar focusing on a crucial aspect of immigration, visa issues for international medical graduates, with a particular emphasis on the J1 waiver in an academic institution and J1 visa transition to O1 visa. The J1 visa, popular pathway for IMGs seeking residency training in the United States, offers invaluable opportunities for clinical experience and professional development. However, it also comes with the specific requirements and limitations, including the mandatory return to one's home country upon completion of the residency program, known as the 2-year home residency requirement. In this webinar, we will dive into the intricacies of the J1 visa for IMGs, exploring its advantages, challenges, and potential implications for career development. We will explore the intricacies of the 2-year home residency requirement and strategies for fulfilling or waiving this obligation, offering practical guidance to international medical graduates navigating this pivotal stage in their medical career. Moreover, we will also shine a spotlight on the transition from the J1 visa to the O1 visa, a pathway that offers greater flexibility and opportunities for international medical graduates to continue their medical practice in the United States. Whether you are a resident physician, a trainee, or a seasoned practitioner, this webinar offers essential information and resources to empower you on your visa journey towards fulfilling your aspirations in the United States. We invite all of you in exploring visa issues for international medical graduates. Disclaimer, please note that this webinar is intended for informational purposes only. ASCO or H.O.M.E does not have any financial obligations regarding it. Viewers are advised to review it with their respective attorneys for further information independently. This webinar is not a substitute for formal legal advice at any point. Please do save the date for ASCO CoP Community of Practice meeting at McCormick Place, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. We are excited to see you all. Please do save. The committee in ASCO CoM, the chair, Nazli Desmond and Dr. Jade Bakuni, and committee has 4 different components. One is visa advocacy and mentorship. Dr. Lee Deng, Dr. Kriti Mittal, and Dr. Masood Pasha Syed, and Dr. Tulsi Jose are involved in that. And Research and Publications Committee, Dr. Fatima and Dr. Charles Jiang, and Dr. Aya Mariam Roy, and Dr. Karun Nupane. And Program Directors Committee has Martina Murphy, Dr. Aarti Sridhar, and Dr. Noha Saror, and Dr. Karina Tawagi. And Community Oncologist Committee has Dr. Laurie Matt Amaral, Dr. Natasha Davan, and Dr. Osama Muslim. Please do connect by searching IMG Community Practice and ASCO My Connection on the following website. Please do follow us at Twitter, IMG_oncologist. And if you have any questions, please do email us at img.oncologist.of.usa@gmail.com. The organizers for this particular webinar includes people who played a pivotal role in this webinar. Dr. Nazli Desmond, she's a Heme-Onc fellow at MD Anderson Cancer Center, Texas. Dr. Ziad El Bakuni, who is a Heme-Onc fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center at New York. And Dr. Lee Deng, thoracic oncologist at University of Washington. And Dr. Tulsi Jose, incoming Stanford Heme-Onc fellow 2024 to 2025. And our guest speakers, Dr. Maya Khalil, she is assistant professor of hematology and oncology at University of Alabama, and Dr. Patrick Forde, who is a guest speaker for us. He is a professor of oncology at Johns Hopkins. And David and Ludka are our immigration lawyers who are helping us out. And I'm the moderator. I'm currently working as a clinical assistant professor at University of Toledo and hospitalist at Toledo Hospital, and I'll be going for MD Anderson transplant oncology in upcoming year. The objectives of this webinar includes J1 waiver in an academic institution by Dr. Khalil, and Dr. Forde will be discussing about J1 to O1 to GC transition. And if Dr. Forde and Khalil will be asking any questions if they have to Dr. David and Ludka, and questions from the audience. I just wanted to introduce the team home. We have the founder, Dr. Tulsi Jose, me as a visa liaison, and Dr. Babu as a conference liaison, poster reviewer, Dr. Saporov, and social media liaison, Dr. Sapkota, and social media liaison, we have Dr. Srishinant, and educational webinar, Dr. Supriya Patient, and mentorship connector, Dr. Umul Asfin, and educational webinars again, Dr. Claudia Villa. The purpose of the team home is to provide the mentorship and career enhancement opportunities for the trainees pursuing the Heme-Onc fellowship. We have around 300 plus members, and around currently 66 people are applying for upcoming a Heme-Onc fellowship. Welcome, Dr. Khalil. I introduce you to Dr. Khalil. She is assistant professor at University of Alabama, and she has successfully completed her J1 waiver in an academic institution. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Khalil.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Bala. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And can you please let us know about your immigration journey, Dr. Khalil?
Sure. So I am originally from Lebanon. I did my medical training at the American University of Beirut, immigrated or traveled to the US back in 2014, did my internal medicine residency in Florida, and did my training in hematology and oncology at Roswell Park in Buffalo, New York. And I was on a J visa throughout that time of training and during both of my training programs. And then I joined the University of Alabama in Birmingham, UAB, about 3.5, almost 4 years ago. And about 8 months ago, I finished my 3 years of J1 waiver. The type of waiver that I have been on is something called the Delta Regional Authority waiver, which I think was interrupted in 2021. So my husband and I and our kind of group of physicians who joined UAB around that time is probably the last batch that actually joined UAB using that waiver opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. So can you please let us know a little bit about the J1 visa specifically? What are the requirements for a J1 visa?
So the J visa, and I'm not the expert. We have, of course, 2 lawyers on the call who can delve into more details. But basically, it is an exchange program that allows your home country to basically send you over to the US in order to get training, with the idea that you're going to go back to your home country for 2 years and serve there and serve the population and the community over there. At the end of the training on the J visa, you have the opportunity to go back for 2 years, serve those 2 years in your home country, and then you can come back to the US if you choose to practice. Or you can stay in your home country. And then the other option is to waive those 2 years and stay in the US. And there are several ways, of course, to do a J waiver that we're going to go over shortly.
Okay, that's great. You exactly pointed out for my next question here, which is, can you please talk about the Delta waiver, which you were talking about, and what are the other waivers? Can you please let us know briefly?
Sure. So the Delta Regional Authority waiver was designed in order to fill a gap, specifically in states in the United States that have physician shortages. And if you think about it, it's really the Delta region of the Mississippi states that are involved with this program. Traditionally, it's been Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee. I'm sure I'm missing a couple. Louisiana is certainly on the list. So basically that part of the Mississippi where historically we have physician shortages. The difference from the traditional Conrad 30 waiver, which we can talk about later, is that it doesn't really have a cap on the number, or it didn't have a cap on the number of physicians that could apply as long as you meet the criteria, meaning that you treat patients that come from that population of underserved patients.
Okay, great. And can you let us know about the Appalachian waiver?
So since the Delta Regional Authority waiver has been paused, and I believe it was paused in 2021, kind of shortly after the COVID pandemic, the Appalachian waiver is another similar waiver where, you know, also if you're serving a population that's underserved, which is the Appalachian area, you could qualify for that. And so the main pathways currently at UAB for a waiver are the Conrad 30, of course, and then the Appalachian waiver, because our center does serve part of that population.
Okay. I did hear as a VA waiver and Conrad 30. Can you talk a little bit more about those two as well?
So the VA waiver, the Veterans Affairs waiver, is a third type, I call it, of the non-capped, if you want, waiver opportunities for people who are interested in J waivers. It would require you to work at a Veterans Affairs institution, and it's also part of filling that gap in physician shortage. The VA waiver and the Appalachian waiver traditionally just take a bit longer to process compared to the Delta Regional Authority, the DRA waiver, and the Conrad 30 waiver. And so sometimes with some institutions, for example, you can go on like an O visa, which we're going to allude to later in this meeting today, and then you can move over to your H visa once your waiver is approved.
Approved. Okay, great. Thank you. Will the partner or the spouse of the J1 holder be able to study or work? Or will they be eligible for EAD whenever they do their J1 visa or whenever you're doing your J1 waiver?
So when you are doing your J visa, your partner or spouse is on a J2 visa, which is your dependent visa. And when they're on that visa, they can work. They do have an authority to work and study. When you move to a J waiver, that automatically, once that's approved, that automatically means that you're moving to an H type of visa, H-1B visa. And so the partner or the spouse of the person who's on an H-1B visa is on an H-4 visa, and that does not allow people to work. And so they won't have an EAD to allow them to hold a job.
Great. Thank you so much. And as you were talking about the timeline for different waivers here, I just wanted to know, what is your practical experience about your timeline? Can you help us out?
Yes, sure. So I started interviewing for my job during my, I would say, second year of fellowship. So that was about 2018, 2019 period of time. I graduated in the pandemic in 2020. And so, of course, we did our interview. And I keep saying we because my husband also is a physician. He is a GI physician. He's also at UAB. And he was on a J visa like me. And so we were not married when we moved to the US. And so we held two different J visas, J1 visas. And so we were interested in, of course, ending up at the same institution for our jobs, because during our fellowship, we were in different states and training at different institutions. And so we were interested in a program that offered either an Appalachian waiver or a Delta Regional waiver. Of course, VA waivers will entertain that, as well as Conrad 30, but we felt that we probably had more flexibility if we ended up on a Delta Regional Authority waiver. And so, of course, we interviewed at multiple institutions. And then once we decided to come to UAB, that was around, I would say, October of that year. We submitted our application, signed our, of course, contract and all that. And I remember that our waiver, although it was, 2020 during the pandemic, which took longer for the processing, our waivers were approved on time. So I was able to start in July, thankfully. My husband started a couple months later, but that was not related to the waiver itself. It was related to mutual, basically, decision between him and his division.
Okay, so I would say our IMGs should start looking for jobs around 12 to 18 months prior to their graduation. Can I say that way?
Usually so if you are about 18 months from graduation is a good time to start. If you want to be very early, you might want to start sooner, but I think 18 months is a reasonable timeline.
Is a reasonable time. And coming to the things what you were saying, the only reason you did not offer Conrad 30 because it has 30 positions. Is that the reason why you did not opt, or?
So yeah, some people, I think people are more familiar with the Conrad 30 program. And so, Conrad 30 waiver opportunities are 30 positions per state. And so, if you want to go to California, for example, you only have 30 positions, or Texas, which are huge states. But also if you want to go to smaller states, you also have 30 positions. And so, and you have a cap per state. So it was more flexible to do, a waiver at a state that offered more positions.
Yeah, actually, Conrad 30 is the only thing which I know so far. So I'm so glad that you did mention about the other waivers. It's a beautiful opportunities for our IMGs. Thank you so much. And last question I have is, I know the way you're telling, it looks like a very difficult. Can you please tell us how difficult it is to get a J1 waiver? And can you help our IMGs and future generation? What are the tips and tricks you want to give to them?
Sure. So of course, while you're going through the process, you feel that it is a huge deal to overcome. But looking back at those days, I think things to keep in mind is that Delta waiver positions, although they are on hold, there are other avenues to get a J visa waived. And so Conrad 30 is an avenue, Appellation waiver is another avenue, and the VA waiver is also another avenue. And one thing you can think of is you can actually, sit down and think, if you want to stay in academics, having a J visa should not prevent you from doing that. There are several institutions that offer J waivers right off the bat. There are a lot of institutions that offer O visas as a transitioning kind of visa to go to before you have your waiver approved. And so, like, one thing I did is I literally sat down, created an Excel sheet with some of the institutions that I was interested in that are academic, that have O visa opportunities or J visa waiver opportunities, and went from there, and literally, emailed every single chair of the division. So that should not stop you from staying in academics. And of course, on the interview trail, it's okay to talk about the visa. It's okay to talk about, being on a waiver, having your questions answered, having your, fears addressed. At the end of the day, we are immigrants to this country. There is a lot that we don't know, and this is a process that the easier we can make it be, the better.
I totally agree with that. And I can see that you must have done a hard work by doing all these things. And thank you so much. And I think we'll definitely focus on the resources for the IMGs regarding the J1 waiver in the future as well. I really appreciate Dr. Khalil for your precious time. And thank you so much for giving us all the valuable information. I appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
Okay, next. Dr. Forde is here with us, and he's professor of oncology at Johns Hopkins, and he has done his J1 to O1 to J1 waiver to GC transition. And Dr. Forde?
Sure, and thanks very much for the invitation, Dr. Bala. So I've been at Hopkins 14 years at this point. Similar to Dr. Khalil, my wife and I both came to the US for training. A little bit of a difference was we actually did quite a bit of our training in Europe before coming here. So we had done our residency and fellowship, and then we both came and did a further GME fellowship here in the US. So I did the Heme-Onc fellowship at Hopkins, and my wife did infectious diseases at the University of Maryland. And similar to Dr. Khalil as well, we were trying to line up our schedules in that ID fellowship was 2 years and Heme-Onc was 3 years. So she actually she became involved in research with her division, and she did a master's in epidemiology for her 3rd year. Along with it, she went through, and I don't know if anyone has come across this, but you can apply to ACGME for a non-accredited fellowship year if you have the funding. And she ended up creating a fellowship with her mentor there for 1 extra year. So we lined up in terms of our schedules at that point. And then we looked into various options, and one of those were the traditional waivers that Dr. Khalil mentioned, the Conrad 30, and we didn't really look too much beyond that at the time. So it's good to hear that there are other options in terms of traditional waiver options. And so at that time, we went to interview at several institutions for post-fellowship. This was, or kind of towards July or August of our 3rd year of fellowship. I think we started about June of our 2nd year looking for positions. And then in July and August, we had kind of started to line up some interviews. I remember we went to WashU, we went to Colorado, a few others, where they had potentially positions for both ID and oncology. And some of them were, to be honest, I would say that the knowledge at some of the programs about the whole waiver process, and particularly about the O1 visa, is very variable. So some of the institutions were well aware of it, some were not. Our own institute, so my own institution, Hopkins, were quite aware of it because they've had quite a lot of people come this route, even in different subspecialties over the years. So at the time I was a fellow, there were probably 3 or 4 faculty members who had done kind of a J1 visa for training and then had joined faculty on an O1 visa. But some of the other institutions really didn't know a whole lot about it, and but they were keen to recruit one or both of us, so they were willing to explore different options, including the Conrad waiver and also the O1 to, or J1 to O1 to kind of academic waiver. David and perhaps Ludka can comment a little bit more on that. But in any case, I ended up joining Hopkins as a faculty member a little bit early on an O1 visa. So around February or March of my 3rd year of fellowship, because there was kind of a clinical need. And the initial application for the O1 visa, at that time, it was run by Hopkins themselves. They had an international office who kind of put together your package. Now it's outsourced to a team of lawyers, which is probably more efficient to a law firm. And I think one of the things I noticed was that the O1 visa application is adjudicated by kind of by an immigration, a US immigration office. In our case, it was in Vermont. So not by specialist scientists or by people who are subject matter experts. So the application for the O1 visa is quite different to the application for an academic waiver in that it's more. So, and David and again, and Ludka can comment, but it's more checking boxes, I would say, and meeting a certain number of criteria rather than the quality of your work or necessarily even the quantity of your work. And there's a list, if you look up, there's an O1 visa list of criteria. One of them is winning a Nobel Prize, which so it'd be interesting to see how many people actually have won one of those and taken up an O1 visa. But kind of, and then there's kind of a criterion of lesser prizes, and that can be anything from I've helped quite a few people over the years, and that can be from winning a Grand Rounds prize for having the best Grand Rounds in your institution in your home country, for example, or winning like an essay competition or something like this, and you add those up, and depending on this person sitting in the office in Vermont or in, I think it was Nebraska was the other place. So in general, they count those up, and so you meet that criterion. So another one I remember is being employed in positions of significant positions for institutions of repute, kind of thing like that. So, and a lot of the hospitals people would be working in would have positions of repute in their state, at least, in the US, where they're doing the residency. And then obviously there are letters of support being recognized by other people, and usually that can be maybe one or two people from your own institution, then other people who you may have come across through ASCO or kind of other institutions where you've had contact with them or your mentors have. In any case, so there's this list that you come up with, and we have had probably, I would say, over the last 10 years, close to 10 people do the route through Hopkins Oncology, and none of them have had major issues. Sometimes it does have to be reworked, and so one person I'm aware of had to kind of resubmit their package because it was kind of probably not put together in the right way. But in general, that's been pretty successful, and I know of people at other institutions as well, perhaps not as well-known institutions where they've also been successful. So my perception, at least, and again, David and Ludka will have a broader view on this, is that a lot of it is dependent on how invested the institution is in you, how open they are to kind of the idea of it, and then having a good lawyer to help you put together the package for it. And then so I don't want to keep talking, but the next step. So once you're granted the O1, and I believe at the time they had to leave the country and re-enter. And my wife did the same process, by the way, so she had to do the same process based on her own CV. Then you re-enter the country and you start your job. The first visa is for 3 years. So one of the mistakes we made at the time was that we didn't really start the process of the academic waiver right away. We kind of took a breath for a couple of years, and we didn't really pursue it very much. And Hopkins at the time had a rule which has now been kind of put to one side, but you had to be on faculty for 2 years to actually pursue the waiver. But then the dean for faculty affairs changed, and the new person said that wasn't necessary. But in any case, we eventually started it. We did find that our own institution's lawyers were quite slow on the waiver process, and we decided to employ somebody outside, and that was actually David's company and Ludka's company, and they were very helpful for that transition through the waiver and green card process.
Great. Thank you so much for giving us information about your immigration journey. I can see that it's definitely one of the most difficult thing, and having a Nobel Prize and all those important information.
You don't need the Nobel Prize. That's the important thing. Yeah.
Okay. It looks like an EB1 visa for me. I mean, the way you're describing all the things and all. So
yeah, I think a lot of it is addressing the specific points in the application,
Yeah. So as you were giving me the timeline, I would say that first you approached the Johns Hopkins for your job, then they advised for O1, or how exactly it turned around? Can you help us out?
Yeah, Hopkins does not, or has not up until now, done the Conrad waiver system. So that is one point, and some institutions do not pursue it. The University of Maryland, I believe, does. So within the state, those would be the two academic places in Maryland, and Maryland does. Hopkins has always pursued the O1 to academic waiver route for people coming off a J1 visa. Some of the other institutions, like WashU, for example, were open to either route. And when I interviewed there, the University of Colorado were as well. I'm aware of many faculty members at Memorial Sloan Kettering, for example, who have done the academic waiver route, whereas just across the street in New York, I'm aware of faculty members who have done the Conrad waiver. So it's very much dependent on patient population served, the institution's kind of desire for what they want you to do, and also kind of their willingness to be open to either option.
Great, great. And should I say that one has to start working on this application 12 months prior?
I would say similar to the Conrad waiver. I think so your CV doesn't have to be out of the world. I think things like review articles, things like case reports, and that's perhaps what I didn't get across, is that the person sitting in the office in Vermont doesn't necessarily know the difference between a case report and a manuscript in the New England Journal of Medicine, because my understanding is they count these up and they don't necessarily know the difference in terms of the quality of the work. So I think if you look at your CV and perhaps run it by an immigration attorney, and see what they think of it, that's an option maybe a year before you'd be graduating fellowship. And then you can start to guide yourself. So do I have enough, and it just has to be enough academic work to be able to do this O1 route? And if you do, then I think the actual timeline isn't much different to the Conrad waiver. I think it's very similar, starting kind of the summer of your year before, and then applying to places where you're interested in being, and then once you have an offer, starting this process of the O1, which is actually quicker probably at that time. It's about I would say it's about a 3-month process, at least from my experience.
Okay. And while on O1, you try to apply for your J1 waiver and try to get your J1 waiver as soon as possible, if at all your program approves or allows. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's done through the NIH predominantly for medical oncologists. So the Department of Health and Human Services, but the sponsoring institution is usually the NIH. And that's kind of the mechanics of it actually resemble the O1 visa quite a bit, but it's more focused on your contribution to science or to medicine in the US during your career to date, and why you're important, kind of of national interest to the US. And again, it's not as high a bar as you would think, but it is a different kind of the application is geared more towards true physicians or scientists to read your application, as opposed to the O1 visa is kind of a more generic thing, meeting these criteria of having a certain number of things that meet the O1 criteria. The waiver has to be a little bit more rigorous in terms of the actual work you're doing and what you're involved in.
Great. Okay. And just a general question for our IMGs. Will the partner or the spouse of the O1 holder be able to study, or are they eligible for work authorization permit?
Yeah, so that is a limitation. And again, when we get to David and Ludka, they might comment, but my understanding is so if the partner has come over as a J2, as a dependent on the J1, then until the waiver is extinguished, until the waiver is addressed, then they can't work so unless they have a kind of independent O1 visa, which is what my wife has. She had her own O1 visa based on her own job and career.
So even they cannot study as well?
I don't think so, and although that's something maybe we could bring in.
Yeah, they can study, but they cannot work on the O3.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you so much, Ludka. And how can a physician switch from a O1 to permanent resident or different kind of visas?
Well, the O1 to H1B, which is kind of the most common one, I think, is by obtaining the waiver. So similar to what Dr. Khalil mentioned, you have to obtain a waiver by some means. And the waiver that I obtained and my wife obtained was through kind of working with our institution to submit an application to, I think it goes to DHHS first, but it is effectively adjudicated in our case by the NIH committee, or whatever they call it. And essentially it was putting together kind of our CV, letters of support, and writing kind of a convincing kind of application for why your work was important to the US government, to the US people. So an important part of that is if you're working in So an NCI designated cancer center, for example, which if you were in academics, a lot of people would be. So all of those cancer centers are supported by a cancer center support grant from the NCI. So you as being an employee of that cancer center, that's one aspect of your work being important to the US government. And that's something where I think oncology has a bit of an advantage if you're in academics, because nearly every academic center either is NCI designated or is a comprehensive cancer center. Other things would be involved in like the cooperative groups, for example, which I was involved in MECOG ACRIN as a junior faculty. But you could be involved in Alliance or any of the other groups, and those are all funded by the NCI as well. So that's another avenue. If you were going this route, I would suggest getting involved in the cooperative group at your institution. Other things would be like CTEP, for example. You may or may not have heard of that. That's the NCI's phase 1 group, where there's a lot of institutions around the US, small institutions, big ones. They're part of a CTEP network, and you can propose clinical trials, or you can go to meetings with them and that sort of thing. And that is another mechanism for showing that you're so an important like contribution to the US. So it's a little bit easier, I would say, for oncology, this waiver, than a lot of other specialties where they're not as tied quite as closely to the NIH. But those are some of the mechanisms, and then things like letters of support, both within the US and ideally internationally. And some of those, if you're involved in ASCO, can be provided as well. That process, when I was doing it, from when you submitted it to when it was approved for me, was about 18 months. It has gotten longer, I believe. So a friend of mine did it in the last year, and it was about just over 2 years from when she submitted the application to when it was approved. So not too much different in terms of timeline to the Conrad, where you have to do 3 years. The difference, I guess, is that during that 2-year period, or whatever length of time it is, you'd be working in academics, as opposed to where a lot of the clinical investigator roles are 50% research, 50% clinical. Whereas for the Conrad waiver, I believe you have to be about 80-90% patient care. So that is one difference between the two, where you have that opportunity to kind of continue a traditional research, clinical research or lab research career, whereas with the Conrad, for the 3 years, you are doing pretty high volumes of clinical work, more than you would be in a lot of academic centers.
That's a wonderful opportunity for the immigrant physicians who wants to continue their career in the academic field. Thank you so much, Dr. Forde, for your time and giving us the great knowledge about all this information. Thanks for your time. Next, our guest speakers, Ludka and David Nachman. Thank you so much coming here, and can you
Thank
help
you
us
for
out?
having us.
Thank you, Ludka.
It was so interesting to listen to Dr. Khalil and Forde, about the journey. Very interesting.
Yes, I agree with that.
So I can just jump into O1. I think, just to add what Dr. Forde was saying, not everyone qualifies. That's the key. So what we do, David and I do on daily basis, we get resumes from researchers, doctors, different professionals, and we review, whether or not they qualify for the O1. So obviously it's not for everyone. It's very subjective, because this is more about what the credentials are. So we do the same as the officers. We do look at publications, citations, that's really important for immigration, presentations, awards, critical capacity, so important role within the organization, salary, that's a criteria as well, memberships, peer reviewing. I think that's the easiest. We always encourage people to do peer reviewing. And all of this criteria, Dr. Bala, is very similar to EB1. So pretty much, if you do meet O1, that typically, that would mean that you could get approved for EB1. Not always, but the criteria is pretty much the same. So
it looks almost similar to me.
Exactly. So there are just some differences, but yeah, it's very discretionary. And, there could be requests for evidence, but, you can always resubmit. I think Dr. Forde was saying that they had an individual that they need to reapply. So it's all about how the case is presented. That's super important. And to persuade the government, because the officer may have 4 weeks of immigration training. That's it. They have no idea. So it's really important to explain, what do you do? Why is this important? And have those peer letters, reference letters. I think about 5-6 letters is a good number. And the timing could be quick because there is a premium processing for L1. So in 2 weeks, potentially you could get decision, but the preparation takes time to get those letters from colleagues, from coworkers. That definitely takes time, and just to prepare a strong case. So the timing really depends on how quickly you can provide the evidence, but rest assured, all of that evidence you can use later on potentially for EB1 or even national interest waiver, which is the EB2 green card category.
Great. Thank you so much, Ludka, for answering those things. And so coming to the O1, I have one more question. Is there any financial obligations for the IMG that they need to pay, or is it sponsored by the institution? Who will be paying the money and all those things?
Yeah, it doesn't really make a difference who pays. Oftentimes, the institution would be willing to, pay for the immigration work. In terms of the salary, though, of course, it would be the responsibility of the institution to pay the salary that they represent on the documents that they're providing, for the individual that they're hiring. And Dr. Bal, I just want to take a step backward on the criteria. And one of the things that Ludka and I always look for, especially with our FMGs, is we'll, of course, look for citations. We ask for a Google Scholar, and we're also looking at the impact of the journals where maybe their documents have been published. And that's something that we use to advocate how, quote unquote, extraordinary they are in their field. So while Dr. Forde pointed out that the officers sitting behind the desk up in Vermont probably don't really understand and they do just count, it's probably true, but we have to advocate for why it's so important, why the impact of a journal of this nature is so important to an individual who's making that contribution.
I agree with that. And it is one of the crucial steps you guys are doing. Make sure that they can able to understand in your way. So make sure they see through your eyes. So I have one more question. As Dr. Forde said, can one apply for permanent resident application, which is I-140, while on O1 visa to secure your priority date? Especially these apply to the country, to the IMGs who are from GC backlog countries. Can they do that?
Yes, definitely they would be able to do that. So as you mentioned, some countries, depending on, where they are from, but there was a time that even the regular, normally they wouldn't be subject. They were, retrogressed, they were retrogressed. So it's always better to just secure the priority date. Even sometimes to do EB2, if it's not super clear that the EB1 may be approved, I think it's always safer to go with the EB2. For example, national interest waiver, it's a lower standard, get it approved. This way you secure priority date, and then you can always bump it and file to EB1. So this is for those that, it's not super strong EB1, because for EB1A, you do need a strong case. So it is a good idea to secure that priority date. You can always retain the earlier priority date. So if you do EB2 classification, then if you're filing an EB1, you can request that you use that earlier priority date from the EB2, which is definitely helpful, especially for those, from India, China, that are retrogressed.
That's
I'd just like to add to that also that we oftentimes will encourage our clients to do both. And a lot of times the work product for an EB1 and an EB2 is overlapping tremendously. Mm-hmm. So what we'll do is we don't double bill for the, unfortunately, a lot of our brethren do that. They will double bill for the two classifications. What we do is we work it out in such a way that you can lock in the priority date and then try to jump up to that higher legal standard. But we're not going to charge our clients more because the work product has already been developed. So works out nicely for our clients. Yeah.
That's very good information. And as Ludka was telling, I see that a lot of other countries are also going to the retrogression nowadays. So it's always good to have your priority date ready in either way possible. What do you think? What do you say, Dr.?
That's correct. You know, the problem is, I think we had that discussion, I think the other day, that maybe it's current under the filing date, which means that the individual can file adjustment of status, but they cannot get the green card until the final action date is current. So that's where even with other countries, we do see that even with the EB2, you know, there are some delays. So sometimes, you know, that should be a consideration as well.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us that information. So I have one more question related to this. What happens to the dependents of the O1 visa when they try to switch from O1 to other visas?
So dependents have all three. So are you talking about what to do when they switch from all three to a different category?
Yes, whether they can able to do their education or whether they will be getting their EAD status, what exactly happens to them?
So with the O3, they can study, as I mentioned before, they cannot work. If there is still issue with the 2-year residency requirement, by the way, they cannot change the status within the US. And I think Dr. Forde was talking about it, that they had to go outside of the US, even for the O1. There is no change of status possible for those that are subject to the 2-year residency requirement. So O1 is a nice workaround. So for those that have, you know, in the past they had J, they can obtain O1, but they have to step out, obtain the visa, and then they return back. So for dependents, obviously we always encourage the same way as Dr. Khalil and Forde, for the spouses to have their own separate ways. It's just easier. And, you know, just to see which one is faster, for example, because O3 cannot work, it's always a good idea to try to switch to O1 if possible. Again, H-1B may not be possible if there is still issue with the waiver, or maybe a different category. You know, if somebody is Canadian or Australian, they may be a different category as well. You know, I just have a doctor, for example, right now. We are going to do Conrad 30, but we are thinking to do TN for a teaching.
Okay.
So it just depends what country, you know, they are from.
TN for Canadians and Mexicans.
Correct.
Medical.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for giving a lot of information on O1. Before, I know we have only 10 minutes more, so I'll try to cover some more questions regarding the J1 here. Just wanted to know just general questions about J1. How long does the J1 visa last? What is the maximum duration of the J1 visa?
So J1, you know, is for many different categories. We have J1 for researchers, obviously physicians, then could be specialists. So it just depends what program. It is valid for duration of status, the same as a student visa. So it's going to be valid, you know, until the program is over. I believe for physicians, it's about 7 years, researchers about 5 years. But it's the same as the F1, DS, so valid for duration of status, as long as the program is, you know, still valid.
Sure, sure. And can you touch on what is Physician National Interest Waiver? And what do you mean by HPSA, Healthcare Professional Shortage Area, and MOA, Medically Underserved Area?
Okay, so we were talking about very briefly about EB2 when I mentioned that sometimes it's better to secure. So there is a regular national interest waiver, and then there is a national interest waiver for physicians. So even for physicians, just now I have one case that I'm doing regular national interest waiver, which is more complicated because you need to prove definitely a lot more and provide more evidence. But then there is one for physicians where they commit that they're going to be practicing for 5 years in the underserved area. So it's very typical path for somebody to go from J, do the Conrad 30, for example, or VA waiver, go to H-1B. Once they have the H-1B, that's valid for 3 years and then can be extended for another 3 years. During that H-1B time, they typically would do this national interest waiver to secure that EB-2. And, they do have to complete the 5 years to obtain the green card. So it depends where they are from. If, for example, the individual is from India, the wait time could be really long time, even 15 years for EB-2. But it has to be in underserved area or HPSA. And they also need to obtain a letter from either Department of Health. So it was a Conrad 30, for example, they would get letter from the Department of Health, from the state, which is not too complicated because they would have done the waiver already with them, that their work is in public interest. So that is important as well. And, it's quite simple, I would say. Once they obtain the waiver, they will get the national interest waiver for a physician. But it may not be great for those that are from retrogressed countries. So
and the data out there about HPSA and HSPA, right? HSPA and MUAs,
HPSA and
right? MUAs and HRSAs. That's all in the federal regulations. So these are designated by HHS, and you can look it up in their also census tracts. So this is all information that's available online if you want to take a look whether or not, let's say, for example, a facility is located within a health shortage professional area or, in a medically underserved area.
Okay. So should I say this PNIW is basically a person can able to file themselves EB-2 by themselves, irrespective of the employer? Can I say that?
correct.
And they have to fulfill the 5-year criteria.
Mhm.
Okay.
By the time they obtain the green card. So if they are from country other than India or China and the visa numbers are current, they would be able to file the final step of the green card process, which is adjustment of status, but that cannot be approved until they fulfill the 5 years.
Okay. That's good.
One thing that I quickly want to mention, we talked a lot about the waivers, but for those that are on a O1, we've had, and I know David will remember, we had someone who was on a O1 for a really long time, and we didn't have to do a waiver. They accrued the 2 years, the 2 years residency requirement. You don't have to get it in one shot, the 2 years. So it is possible to go back home, like let's say every year for 2 months and just accrue the 2 years over the long period of time. And this way you avoid waiver altogether.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that was specific to a Fulbright scholar, actually. Who had that was a very particular circumstance, but yeah, I do remember that.
But it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good to know. Actually, that comes to my next question. That are there any
Sorry, could I ask one question of David and Ludka? There was a fellow who worked with me some years ago who he was from Syria and the civil war was on at the time, and he was able to get a kind of a
persecution
special
waiver.
Yes, yeah. So is that something that's available for any countries, or is it very much specific to the?
It's very tough to get because it's almost like asylum, if not harder. So it's just a different type of waiver. We were just talking about IGA, interested government agencies waivers, but there's also, for example, persecution and also hardship. So if I actually see it quite a lot, that doctors get married to US citizens or even green card holders and they have kids ultimately. So we have done that as well to show hardship to the spouse that is a green card holder or US citizen. That's a completely different route of the waiver. And actually we do it. So if someone has a spouse that is, US citizen or green card holder, or even child for the waiver, then, this could work as well. But the hardship needs to be proven to them.
Okay.
So there actually, and I'll just do it real quickly, is that there are 5 bases for getting the waiver. And One is exceptional hardship, which Ludka just mentioned. Second is persecution, which Ludka just mentioned, and Dr. Forde, you had just asked about. You can also do, there's also a no objection, but unfortunately that doesn't work for FMGs. And then there's the IGAs, which is most common, and then there's also the state Conrad programs. So the IGAs would be federal, and the Conrad programs are delegated to the states. So those are the 5 bases for waivers.
The J1 visa holder should triple check the DS, because I have a doctor from India, for example, but the purpose was a different one. He came with the J1 now to do research. So we actually could do no objection waiver for him.
Okay.
Because it was a different J1 that he came for. And he thought he was advised by his institution that he cannot do that. And, you know, once we reviewed, and actually I think we did even an advisory opinion, he was able, and he got no objection waiver. And he happens to be married to US citizen, so we are pursuing family-based green card.
Green card. Okay, that's a good information, and it's always contact the expertise to make sure that whether you're doing correct or not, that's the end of the day.
Exactly.
Because sometimes we think that we assume things, but it's not all the time correct. So
the government is not always correct. So it's always
Yes.
better to triple check. Even, you
Triple
know,
check.
when you get your visa issued, just triple check your visa. When you enter, that's super important. Check your I-94. They make so many mistakes at the CBP, at the port of entry. So, you know, I hope everyone, whoever travels, everyone checks the I-94. Please have it corrected, because that could be an issue down the road when you're switching. For example, you have J1, you successfully got your waiver, you're switching to H1B, then it could be an issue if there is a problem with your I-94.
Thank you so much, Ludka. In the interest of time, we have 1 minute left. So I have one question I can ask here. Hopefully, let's say this. I think first 2 questions were already we discussed. I'll go to the third question here. Is O1 visa is better than H1 visa if interested in an academic career?
So I'm going to just say, because we keep saying about different countries, it depends. You know, that not everyone has credentials for the O1. And then remember that the O1 is for 3 years, and then it's just 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, you know, indefinitely, but it's 1 year interval, which could be a headache for people to keep renewing the visa. Whereas H you get for 3 years, then you get it for 3 years. If you're from retrogressed country, you can keep renewing it in 3-year interval, assuming that you started the green card. So it's hard to say. H1B is easier to do, 100%. But then, you know, O1 is more about person's credentials. So they're both really good visas. David, what do you think?
I think it totally depends. The academic waivers or the waivers that I've done, you know, the individuals clearly O1 worked, and it worked for the institution, but I can definitely see where it doesn't. Then you would have to fall back and look at the H1B, but it's just a case-by-case basis. It's really, we would have to look at it and line up the strategy.
But the O1 is really nice when you're thinking about the waiver, if you can do the O1, because it gives you breathing room. I think Dr. Khalil was super organized when I heard the timing, but some of my clients come too late and we don't have enough time. And then sometimes it's so unfortunate, they have to go back home, wait for 2-3 months before we can bring them back on the H1B. So if there is that opportunity to do O1, then it's, I think, less stressful for, you know, for clients, for doctors. They can continue their work and slowly do the waiver and then potentially move to H1B. And so if there is a potential, you know, it's a nice option to have for sure.
Yeah,
and I know we're running short on time, and Dr. Bal, I just wanted to point out, because in preparation for this program, I came across some information, and Dr. Khalil had mentioned a lot of the waiver programs. There is also a waiver program called the Northern Border Regional Commission, which as of April 1st is also allowing specialists if you could show need. So that's one that I don't think that we had mentioned yet. So it's called the Northern Border Regional Commission. They have a nice website, and you can get information on what their requirements are by just looking that up online.
Great. Looks like they replaced that with the Delta waiver here because that is not applicable now. So that's good. Good information. And I totally agree with you that, people who does not know the oven path, now it's a beautiful opportunity for them if at all they're worried about going back to the country for that 2-3 months until that J1 waiver gets approved. So thank you so much, Ludka and David, for giving us that information. And I think it's 7:02 already. I think in the interest of time, we'll conclude our session, but please don't worry. I know a lot of questions were asked here. We'll be certainly collecting all the questions, and we'll be asking and using this information in our future webinars. And possible future prospective discussions will be exploring green card options for international medical graduates and resources for IMG seeking J1 waiver jobs. We will be most likely doing on in the future. And please do save the date of ASCO Community of Practice meeting on May 31st, 4 to 6 p.m. at McCormick Place, Chicago at ASCO. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the webinar on immigration and visa issues for international medical graduates. I'm immensely grateful to our esteemed guest speakers, Dr. Khalil, Dr. Forde, as well as attorneys, David and Ludka, who generously shared their expertise and insights with us today. I wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation for your valuable contributions to our discussions. Your insights and guidance have been instrumental in helping IMGs navigating the complexities of visa sponsorship and legal status. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate all the members who joined the program. We look forward to seeing you all on May 31st. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you
Thanks
for
so
having
much.
us. Have a
Thanks.
good night.
Thanks for the
Have a
invitation.
good evening. Yeah.